we are not powering up as we go along. Unless Grimm performs a Winx Club style transformation in the middle of a fight scene in the next book, I don't think he deserves to have a flair, in my humble opinion. Well, 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 look who's back. That's right, me. And I'm back because Alex Astor has recently announced the name of the second book in her Lightlark series, and actually that might have been a lie. I don't know exactly when she released the information about her new book, but it's coming. It's coming, and I'm probably gonna read it. I actually kind of liked Lightlark. I didn't think it was anything revolutionary, certainly, but I think I gave it a much fairer review than other people. This is not a hate video at all, but it is kind of a creative writing exercise for myself, because while there were some aspects of Lightlark I liked, there were also many aspects that I thought could be amended to create a more interesting story and more interesting characters. I also want to mention that this video will contain mega spoilers, so please go read the book if you're interested and you don't want to be spoiled. One last thing, I'll probably be putting up some artwork to like spruce up the video. So there might be some artwork that doesn't have any names on it, and I didn't forget to give credit. I just created the art in either Midjourney or DALL-E or some other AI art generator because I don't have the skills to make that kind of stuff myself. First thing, I liked Isla, but I didn't love her. And honestly, I'm not sure Astor loved her either. I think Astor probably conceived of Isla first, got very attached to the character, poured a lot of herself into the character, and then by the time she realized later that Isla wasn't as narratively interesting as all of the other characters who have been around for centuries, I think she was just too invested to make any pivots. I think the character that would be strongest to carry this franchise is Celeste, and I'm not talking about third act twist Celeste Aurora. I'm just gonna pretend that didn't happen. I just think that the curse on Starling is so brutal. Like, the idea that everyone dies before 25 has such insane implications for the rest of the realm. It means that this is a realm of children, basically. They probably feel like they have to have children really, really young. And this is a world where people live to be many hundreds of years old, so 25 is just crazy to me. Also, imagine if Celeste's 25th birthday was on the last day of the centennial. Those are the kind of stakes that I want. So let me tell you how I would open Lightlark from Celeste's point of view. So we'd have Celeste sitting in this eerily quiet throne room. There would be seats laid out for her advisors, for members of her cabinet, for her ladies in waiting, and for the rest of the royal family, but all of these chairs would be empty. Today would be 100 days from her 25th birthday and the day that she was scheduled to depart for the centennial. And she's feeling restless because, as far as anyone else is concerned, this is the last day she ever has in her home kingdom. And so she gets up, unaccompanied by guards or servants or anyone, and leaves the palace grounds to walk around the capital city. Celeste's realm would be really beautiful, but also really somber. It would be brimming with youth and power, but it would be minuscule, for one thing, and deeply disconnected from the other realms because, after all, what sensible monarch would want to waste their time investing in a kingdom full of children? So we would follow Celeste as she walked throughout the city, and we would make it very clear that she's a very beloved ruler. Everyone would know her, everyone would know that this is likely the last time they would ever see her, and many of the youths of the kingdom would walk alongside her as she strolls along. When she reaches the town center, she would be surrounded by her people, many of whom would be weeping and reaching out to her. Celeste would turn to them, make a movement to embrace them, but then all of a sudden, before she could, she would be teleported to Lightlark for the centennial. What I really want from Celeste in this reimagining is a character who starts off the novel as completely hopeless, just kind of assuming that she will die in the events of the centennial, but throughout the book starts to want to fight for her realm and for the future of her people. Speaking of Celeste's realm, why don't we talk about some of the changes I would make to the world building in this book? So let's talk about the 5 realms. Now, obviously in the book there are 6 realms or 6 kingdoms, but I firmly believe, and I am so sorry if Azul is your favorite character, but I'm willing to argue that Skyling should not exist. Azul was given next to nothing to do throughout the book, and I just think Aster was having a really hard time juggling 6 different main or main-ish characters, and Skyling itself also just has too much overlap with the other realms. Like, do we really need a sky realm and also a star realm? And having Starling is already pushing it, given the sunling and starling. The sun is usually a star. I think these are the kinds of questions that the reader shouldn't have to dwell on and get caught up in the weird logic of how this world works. I personally would remove Skyling and Azul from this book, but I also understand that he's like the only queer character, and well, I guess Cleo is bisexual, but all we get from that is a passing reference, and Azul is also one of the only Black characters in this book, I believe. So I wouldn't just flippantly remove him. I would try to include more representation in other parts of the book to adjust for his absence. The word realm is also just confusing to me in Lightlark because I don't know if these kingdoms are like their own little contained realities, like maybe they're all on their own planets or their own like planes of existence, or if they're just different geographical locations on the same planet or in the same space. It was very unclear to me, and it seems like this is something we should establish if we have realms that are based off of the sun and the moon. Like, I would assume that we're all on one planet that has some kind of sun and some kind of moon. Like, this is just a fantasy Earth. But the way they talk about realms and using the star stick, it seems like we're hopping across dimensions. It's very confusing. I get really heated over this for some reason. So I say the simpler the better. We just got one planet, and these 5 nations all occupy one continent. So let's go through each of them. Okay, so first let's talk about Starling, which, just like Wildling in the original book, would be the most important for me because my main character would be Celeste, and obviously she's from Starling. Starling would occupy the smallest territory in the northeast of the continent. I envision it as very mountainous so that its people can live as close to the stars as possible, and I definitely want the rulers' cultural backgrounds to bleed into their performance during the centennial. So for Celeste, she's from a very high altitude, star-loving place. She should feel very comfortable with heights, but if there are any trials that force her to go into a deep or dark or constrictive location, that should really terrify her. Like, maybe I would probably write some kind of underwater cave scene where she needs to go down into the depths and fetch something in a cave and bring it back up, because that would just be really horrifying given everything she's used to. I also think it would be fun if the architectural motifs of Starling, since we'd get to see a little bit of what Starling actually looks like in the beginning scene with Celeste walking around her kingdom, I think it would be cool if we could make it look like observatories of some kind. A lot of glass, a lot of white. I also imagine that this is a society that places a huge emphasis on astronomy. So science would be really important to them culturally. Regarding the Starling curse, I would keep it the same as in the book. Everyone dies at 25. And finally, regarding their powers, I'm thinking pretty similar to the original book. Lots of like energy blasts and bursts of light to blind enemies, stuff that if you could imagine it on Starlight from The Boys, the TV series, I think it would fit right in for Starling and for Celeste. Okay, let's move on to the eastern seaboard, the realm of the moon, of water, the tides, moonling. Such a beautiful aesthetic. In Lightlark, she didn't have enough time to create brand new nations and cultures and just completely craft her own little worlds for each of the 6 realms, and you could really tell. In my opinion, at least. Everything just felt so very flat to me. And so if you don't have enough time to create something completely new, why can't you just draw inspiration from some existing cultures? I know Wildling was supposedly inspired a bit by her Colombian heritage. I didn't really pick that up, gotta say, but it might honestly be because Aster has already written an entire middle grade series that is inspired from her heritage, and she might just be tired of it at this point, which, like, I can understand. But if you want to pay homage to any earthly cultures or civilizations. I would love to see Moonling draw some inspiration from the Philippines, which obviously has such a rich history of seafaring, and it's just a country that has so consistently performed masterful feats of fishing, seafaring, sea-based voyaging, and I think if you're going to have a kingdom that is ocean-centric, it might be nice to pay homage to Southeast Asia in some way. Also, just want to make it clear, I'm not lecturing Aster, a woman of color, on how to write diversity. I just think it's a missed opportunity how underrepresented Southeast Asia is in fantasy in general, because Asia is already under or misrepresented a lot of the time, and then even when we do get Asian representation, it's often just China, Japan, or Korea. I don't know, I think it would make the book a lot more interesting. So Moonling would occupy the eastern and southern coasts and islets. It would be a nation of seafarers and explorers, a huge sense of adventure associated with this kingdom, excellent engineers and craftspeople because they're building all these boats and navigation tools themselves. For powers, I just wrote water. And regarding their curse, I would keep it almost the same as in Lightlark, but just make the stakes a little higher again. So instead of it just being a full moon, I would just say anytime the moon is out, people from Moonling feel a compulsion to drown themselves in any body of water. So it's not like tidal waves or whatever was happening during the centennial. I honestly didn't really follow what was happening there. It seems like if you just stay inland, you'll be totally fine, which is like, why is Cleo even in the centennial? Her realm is basically fine. To make the curse a little more meaningful, every time the moon is out, you feel a bit of a compulsion to just throw yourself into any body of water. It could be the ocean, it could be a bathtub. I think that would be really scary, especially for a people who draws their power from the moon and the tides. My voice is going, give me a sec. I'm also trying to be quiet because it's kind of late and I don't want to annoy people, but that's just making it even harder to talk. Anyway, I want to give a side note about Cleo. I want to keep her very strong personality because my favorite trope is bitch with a heart of gold. It just does it for me every time. And I want her to kind of parallel Oro, who we'll talk a bit more about later. So both of them very stubborn, maybe kind of extroverted characters. They are literally the sun and the moon, so I feel like there should be some kind of foil going on between them. So I think it would be cool if Cleo's curse was kind of like the reverse of Oro's. So maybe during the day, Oro and all of the sunlings, they feel a bit of a compulsion to burn or mutilate themselves somehow with heat or with fire. And then Cleo, of course, is at night feeling a compulsion to drown themselves. Those are kind of like opposite sides of the same coin, and I think it would just make the cast a little more dynamic when you can see parallels like that happening between the rulers. Okay, since I mentioned Oro, we might as well talk about him. So the southwest of the continent, a region I don't really have a super clear vision of, but I think it would be nice to have some kind of really hot deserty area. I imagine that would make the most sense for a kingdom of people whose powers are tied to the sun. Obviously, Oro's primary powers would have to do with fire, and Cleo's would be water-based, and maybe their secondary abilities would have something to do with the sun and the moon. If we continue the theme of drawing inspiration from existing nations on Earth, I think Egypt would be a fantastic source of inspiration for Sunling. When I went through my Egyptology phase, as all middle school girls inevitably do, Ra was always my favorite god, or just favorite deity in general, so I would love to pay tribute to him somehow. Okay, powers, like I said, based around sun and fire, and the curse would be a compulsion to burn oneself, and it would affect them most during the day. Sunling should just be its own thing. I saw absolutely no reason why the sunlings should also live on Lightlark. Okay, we might as well do Oro's buddy next and talk about Nightshade. This region, Nightshade, should be in the Northwest and should be just as miserable as the American Pacific Northwest. So lots of gloom and mist and clouds, lots of rain and very cliffy, imposing terrain. I couldn't think of a lot of culture for this one. I just wrote goth. I thought a lot about potential curses, and I thought it would be so insidious if the people from Nightshade just had their vision like go black every once in a while, just like completely randomly, because this is the realm of like the dark, right? So imagine if their vision just went dark every once in a while and there was no way to control when it happened. Like maybe Grimm is fighting for his life in one scene and all of a sudden, oops, you're blind. I think the curse for Grimm needed to be a little more insidious than whatever it was in the book, because he already can teleport, which I maintain is like the most OP ability you can have. I think he needed to be nerfed a little bit, and having this like random blindness I think would not only be some good creative irony, because Aster said all of these curses were very specific to the realms, but I also just think it would be great to knock him down a peg, make the playing field a little more equal. Powers I haven't really fleshed out. I guess he can keep his teleportation. I'm not really sure what is well associated with darkness. When all else fails, and I don't know what powers to assign to a character that has a certain motif, I'm like, oh, I want this person to be associated with the sun and the stars, or this person to be associated with fire. I always think of Winx Club. There was no darkness fairy in Winx Club, but they had the witch, right? They had Darcy, one of the tricks. I don't know, maybe use them as inspiration. Okay, last up we got wildling. I think wildling should occupy the most terrain, but should be very sparse. So kind of like a Canada or Russia scenario. I imagine it as being very temperate, but also landlocked, and it would be the only kingdom that borders all of the other ones, which I think would be really interesting for Isla to manage, because geographically, that's a really tough situation. Like, you could be invaded by any of these other 4 nations at any time, and you don't have ready access to any ports. Like I said before, Alex Aster is of Colombian ancestry, and I think wildling was supposed to be inspired by her heritage. Again, I didn't really see exactly where that was supposed to come in, but I would just love to see wildling built up a little more fleshed out, and drawing from Colombian culture would be a good way to do that. I like the idea that this realm is one of great hunters. That makes sense given their location and the prevalence of the forests. I could do without the all-woman thing. I didn't get it when I first read Lightlark, and I don't really get it now. I could also do without the secondary curse thing, like the eating hearts. Oh my god, that was just put in there so that Oro or Grimm, I forget which, they were so interchangeable to me, that was only in there so that he could call her Heart Eater, and then at the end of the book start calling her Heart. Oh, I hated that. I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible hater, but that was the only reason that was in there. So yeah, one curse per realm. I like the idea of the wildling curse affecting their humanity in some way. So if the curse induced in them this like temporary fit of madness, basically, where they lost control over their reason and maybe some parts of their memory, and they descended into this very animalistic state where they felt like they needed to hunt and kill. This would be good dramatic irony too, because we know that Isla is already very conscious of the fact that other realms think of her people as a very uncivilized people. To have this curse do that to them would not only be very scary, but also just very ironic. Oh my god. And something else I would omit along with the extra curses is the extra powers, like the flairs. We were talking about Winx Club, but this is not Winx Club. We are not powering up as we go along. Unless Grimm performs a Winx Club style transformation in the middle of a fight scene in the next book, I don't think he deserves to have a flair, in my humble opinion. Let's just keep things simple, and we'll say 1 power, or at least 1 like family of connected powers per kingdom. And for Isla/for wildling, I think that would just be your classic like nature-y powers, affinity with animals, maybe some like plant or vine manipulation. I even think a bit of terraforming would be cool, and that would be convenient based on what I want the finale to look like. Okay, I have nothing written down for this part, so wish me luck with this. Here's what I'm thinking. Okay, so Grimm and Oro are going to be about 500, 600 years old, super old. Cleo is going to be like 300 or 400, so old but a little less so. Isla, I feel like maybe 95. Like, she hasn't had her first centennial yet, but she has a little more experience than Celeste. And Celeste, of course, is going to be 24 because this entire book is kind of the way I've set it up. It's like, oh no, she's turning 25 on the last day of the centennial. I really liked in Lightlark the story of how Isla and Celeste met and became friends, and they already knew each other going into the centennial, but it doesn't make... Well, okay, in my version, it would make more sense if Celeste was the one who went into Isla's realm, and that's how they became friends, especially since the Star Stick, worst name ever, oh my god, especially since that was a starling artifact to begin with. It just makes sense that Celeste, a young Celeste, would have been the one to hop on over to Isla's realm, and then they're friends going into the centennial. I also think that Grimm and Oro should be friendly, if not best of friends, going into the centennial, because they're the oldest, they've been through the most. I honestly forget what the background was for why the centennial existed in the first place in Lightlark. Something to do with the war, right? And like, they don't know who put the curses on everyone else in the first place. I don't know, but whatever that catastrophic event that happened beforehand was, Oro and Grimm have been in it together for a really long time. I'm also thinking that Cleo and Isla have some existing beef going into this, because as you could see from this beautiful map I drew, there's just this little sliver that is keeping Wildling away from the water, and it's occupied by Cleo. I just imagine there would be a lot of dispute over that territory. Celeste wouldn't really know anybody except Isla, and she would probably be really scared of the other three. Grimm and Oro would probably have some beef with Cleo going into this, not so much because of what the moonlings did, but more so because, again, I just want Cleo to be such a bitch, but for her to show that she actually has a really good heart. So what's going on with the centennial itself? So a couple key changes here. First of all, again, no sunlings on Lightlark. So we got our little Earth, right? And we'll have the continent that the 5 realms are on one side. This island, it goes over the continent once every 100 years. What am I saying? It's getting late. It goes over the continent one time in 100 years, and that's why it's called the centennial. No one knows where it is before it enters the airspace of the continent. No one knows where it goes. It's such a mystery. All they know is that as soon as it enters, the 5 rulers are just like sucked up by a force that is beyond their control. So this is not an optional exercise. The rulers have to go to the centennial. Because that's the other thing in Lightlark. I was like, Cleo doesn't need to be there. Can she just like not be there and she would be totally fine? But no, in this version, the rulers have to be there. They get sucked up. It takes 100 days to get across the continent, and then the rulers are beamed back down. Like some kind of alien starcraft or something. There are no spectators on the island. This was really important to me. The island is like this creepy, unexplored place full of monsters and relics, and it's just a huge unknown variable for all of the contestants in the centennial. 2 things can happen. The first is that they can kill one of the rulers, which they haven't been very successful in doing in the past, or the second option, they can try to find some artifact or maybe some kind of being, some like old god that will speak to them, some old race of creatures that will try to help them out, and there's a potential that one of them would know how to break the curses without killing anybody. There are none of these like weird rules about how like first you have to be in pairs and then there's going to be a ball. Like, no, I want this to be totally unexplored territory where no one really knows what's going on. You have the constant threat of being murdered by your teammates. By removing these rules about how like there are little islets around the main island and the rulers will like go to them to sleep. Like, oh my gosh, there was just too much going on and I didn't understand why. So they get to the island, and this is where things start getting really self-indulgent, by the way. Celeste is pretty much ready to die. Like, she's not going to put herself into danger or like kill herself in front of everyone else just so all the other realms can survive. But if the opportunity arises, she will not hesitate to put herself in danger because she feels like my realm is already dying. Like, there's no hope for us. Like, the best thing I can do is off myself, and then at least all of these other kingdoms will thrive. And so for the first good chunk of the book, maybe the 5 main characters are like, well, why don't we explore the island together? And they're trying to get a feel for one another because they need to make the decision of like, I'm gonna try to kill one of these people. I need to figure out who is the best candidate. They're exploring the island together and they all agree, we're gonna look for a relic. We're gonna try to figure out the secrets of Lightlark, but really they're kind of just sussing out the opponents and figuring out who is the weakest or who they want to kill, basically. And Celeste is really just kind of going through the motions, and this makes Cleo really mad at her because I feel like Cleo is the kind of character to be like a very like Bakugo from My Hero Academia, like, you need to give me 150 million% every time or else it's not real, you know? She is very put off by the fact that Celeste seems to have given up. It would even be really interesting if Cleo at one point saves Celeste. Like, I don't know, maybe Celeste puts herself into danger, maybe during that underwater cave scene I said I would work in, and she's basically ready to take one for the team and dip, and then Cleo saves her and she's like, why would you save me? And then, you know, Cleo gets all mad. I don't know. Like I said, this is getting very self-indulgent and you'll see why in a minute. So my idea is that for the first half of this book, we're all together, but slowly you can see little rifts appearing in this group of 5. For all of my Isla stands, I would actually keep the main love triangle that we saw in Lightlark, but I would actually make it a triangle and not a love V, which I complained about in my first video, and I'm still complaining about it because I don't want it to just be Oro and Grimm. They both love Isla so much. I want it to be like Oro and Grimm both like Isla, but they're good friends also, and they don't want to step on each other's toes, and it's complicated because they're also rivals, and it's just more interconnected. Very important to me to have a very deeply connected cast. And so these 3 start slowly getting entangled with one another, and I think Grimm and Oro should kind of see something in Isla and be like, hey, you know, like, the 3 of us could make a really strong alliance, and it kind of seems like Celeste is the best candidate for people that we should kill because her realm is so tiny. Then Isla's like, no, that's my childhood best friend, like, I'm not gonna murder her. But then she starts to like slowly kind of get convinced, and there are some 2 hot guys telling her, and no one is a villain in this book outright, but I like the idea of these 5 rulers all doing what they think is best for their continent and for their realm. And so maybe Isla starts to very slowly get convinced, like, yeah, maybe this actually is the best thing I can do for my people. Meanwhile, Cleo and Celeste getting a little more friendly with one another. Maybe Cleo is starting to slowly convince Celeste to actually fight for her life. And I'm just saying, this would be a good opportunity for some queer representation. I don't see a lot of sapphic representation in fantasy is all I'm saying, and I would like to see more. So maybe there are 2 romantic, I held up 4, that's cool. So 2 romantic entanglements going on. You have the triangle and you have the Cleo-Celeste pair. I'm thinking that at like the 60% mark, they should split apart because they're like, okay, clearly alliances have formed. This is, sorry, this is the time that we need to get away from the enemy. And so now we primarily are following Cleo and Celeste. They're looking around the island. They're thinking it's 2 against 3, and Grim and Oro are the most powerful, and Celeste is the least powerful. So we probably can't kill these people. We cannot beat this mother team. So they're like, okay, we have to go start talking to the people on this island. We have to start looking for relics. That's the route they take. Meanwhile, Isla, Grim, and Oro are just trying to hunt those 2 down. So now Cleo and Celeste are being hunted not only by the island itself, but also these other 3 very powerful people, all while struggling with their feelings for one another, and Celeste trying to fix everything before her impending death. And once again, Oro, Grim, and Isla wouldn't be villains because they're really just trying to do what they think is right. And Isla especially, she would have a kind of a moral conundrum where it's like, this is my friend. Oh, it would be so angsty. Like, this is my best friend. Like, I love her like a sister, but I have to kill her. So the book would all come together like this. The finale, right, would be on the 100th day of the centennial. This is our last chance. Celeste and Cleo would have finally found some kind of relic that they believe they can use to break the curses without having to kill anyone. Great news. The bad news is that the second they would be about to use it after all of their trials and tribulations, and they've been working for 300 pages to get to this point, the second that they tried to use this, the other 3 would attack, and they don't give them time to explain, hey, no, we think we have a solution. Because another fantasy pet peeve is just like the amount of dialogue going on between fight scenes. It's like, no, Oro, Grim, and Isla they want to kill one of these 2, and they're not gonna give them time to explain and potentially confuse them and mislead them. So yeah, these groups are fighting, and then the relic gets destroyed. You can't use it anymore. Oh my god, now someone has to die. And then I'm thinking Oro dies in the fight. Oro or Grim. It can't be Isla. It can't be Celeste. I like Cleo too much to kill her. So it should be Oro or Grim. And I think the majority of the Lightlark fans like Grim better. So I say Oro dies in the fight, and that's what breaks the curses. Maybe this wasn't even intentional. Maybe Celeste has to kill him out of self-defense or something. But either way, the curses are broken, but at a huge cost, right? Because Oro has 2 lovers basically throughout this book that are going to mourn him terribly. And I think it would be so cool if the book ended like Isla runs over to grab his dying body, and then the second he dies, the curses break, and that's how you know he's dead. And then Isla just lets out this scream of anguish, and with it erupts this power that she didn't even know she had, because she wasn't even born yet when the curses first went into effect, and they've been kind of muting her powers. And so she's holding her lover's body and screaming, and her scream causes the island of Lightlark to shatter, basically. So it just shatters into a million pieces, and all of them start falling. Grim will somehow get to Isla and teleport her to safety. And then, since this is the 100th day and maybe the last hour, Lightlark is over the ocean. So then maybe Cleo will grab Celeste and use her powers. So a giant wave will come up and grab them and make sure they get down safely. And the book would end with this very clear divide. You have the 3 countries in the, I guess this would be the West, and then the 2 countries in the East. And you have these clear relationships with one another, and now they both hate each other. So for the first book, it was oh no, poor Celeste, her childhood best friend is trying to kill her. And then now it's oh, poor Isla, one of the loves of her life was just killed by her supposed childhood best friend. And what I'm setting up here is that the next book could be a war, a war between the 3 and the 2 nations on this continent. And maybe if you want to expand the world building, there could be other continents on this planet that get involved. It's basically just a big fight between them. This series, however long it would go, I imagine it would be some kind of trilogy. The thing is that as soon as the curses were lifted and there was no common enemy, all of the nations started fighting against one another. And it's unclear, is this justified? If it's for vengeance, allegiance, like who started it, what's going on. All of this fighting just because they don't have a common enemy to fight against. And it could just be such an interesting moral exploration of what do we as human beings need to connect with one another and to feel like we want to fight and defend for one another. Can we only find meaningful connections through hatred, or can we find those connections through love? I don't know. That's what I would explore in this series. Well, I don't know if this video made any sense, but I hope it did, because I had a lot of fun kind of thinking up what I would have done with the premise of Lightlark. And I have nothing else to say, and it's probably for a good thing because my voice is pretty much gone at this point. But thank you so much for watching, and oh, thank you so much for 100 subscribers. That made me so happy to see that. It was just, I love our little community, and yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and liking and commenting. It's always a joy. So yeah, hope you guys all have a good one. See you next time.